The stars themselves seemed to bow before the Zephyrian war fleet as it carved through the darkness of space. Massive crystalline ships, each one the size of a small moon, moved in perfect formation. Their hulls gleamed like living diamonds, pulsing with veins of electric blue energy that could be seen from light years away. Admiral Vexthara stood on the command bridge of the flagship Eternal Dominion his towering frame casting shadows across the control panels. Like all Zephyrians, his body was a work of natural engineering perfection, 8 feet tall, covered head to toe in translucent crystal armor that had grown from his own bones over centuries of life. Each plate of his exoskeleton caught and refracted the bridge's lighting, creating rainbow patterns that danced across the walls. Status report. Vexthara commanded, his voice resonating like wind chimes in a stalled subcommander Crynal. Smaller, but no less impressive with her silver-blue crystalline shell, stepped forward. The 847th Conquest Fleet is approaching the target system. Admiral, long-range scans confirm one inhabited world. Technology level appears primitive. No energy shields detected. No plasma weapons. No quantum drives. Vexthara's mandibles clicked, together in what passed for Zephyrian laughter. Another backwater civilization? How disappointing. I was hoping for at least some entertainment. The bridge crew shared his amusement. They had reason to be confident. In 3,000 years of expansion, the Zephyrian Empire had never faced a species that could challenge them. Their crystal bodies were nearly indestructible, capable of surviving in the vacuum of space without protection. Their weapons could slice through solid metal like paper. Their ships could destroy entire continents with a single focused beam. Admiral, call out the sensor operator, his voice carrying a note of confusion. I'm detecting something unusual about this species. Oh, Vexthara moved to the sensor station with fluid grace. What makes these creatures special? They're fighting each other, sir, constantly. Our scans show active conflicts across multiple continents. They seem to be in a perpetual state of war. The bridge fell silent for a moment. This was unusual. Most species the Zephyrians encountered had achieved some level of planetary peace before developing space technology. It was the natural order of things. Only united worlds could focus their resources on reaching the stars. Fascinating. Vexthara mused, a planet of warriors. Perhaps they'll provide some actual resistance before they kneel. Subcommander Crynal pulled up the tactical display. Holographic images of Earth appeared in the air above them, rotating slowly. Intelligence suggests they call themselves humans. Admiral, carbon-based, single skeleton structure. No natural armor. No energy projection capabilities. They appear to rely entirely on crude mechanical devices for warfare. Mechanical. Vexthara examined the readings. You mean they still use projectile weapons? Yes, sir. Metal bullets fired from chemical explosive devices. Some basic rocket technology. They haven't even achieved plasma manipulation. The Admiral's crystalline features shifted into an expression of disbelief. They're still in the Metal Age. How did they even achieve space flight? Barely, sir. They've only managed to establish a few small orbital stations. No interplanetary colonies. No faster-than-light travel. They're essentially trapped on their home world. Vexthara turned away from the display, his interest waning. This would be like all the others. The species would see their ships, realize the hopelessness of resistance and surrender. Their leaders would kneel before Zephyrian might. Their world would be added to the Empire. Their people put to work mining resources or serving as basic laborers, set course for their home world. He commanded, standard conquest protocol. We'll give them one chance to surrender peacefully. When they inevitably submit, we'll establish mining operations and move on to the next system. As the fleet adjusted course toward Earth, Vexthara reflected on the glory of Zephyrian civilization. They were evolution's masterpiece, the galaxy's apex predators. Fear was a concept they had forgotten millennia ago. Nothing in the universe could threaten them. The Zephyrian Empire had a saying, "What cannot bend, breaks. What cannot break, rules." They had never encountered anything that wouldn't bend. The massive ships accelerated toward the small blue world, their crystal hulls singing harmonics that could be heard across subspace. Each vessel carried enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. Each warrior aboard had been trained for centuries in the art of conquest. They expected another easy victory, another world to add to their collection. They expected submission, fear, and the sweet satisfaction of watching another species kneel before Zephyrian superiority. What they found waiting for them would change everything they thought they knew about war, about fear, and about what it truly meant to be apex predators in a galaxy full of surprises. The small blue planet continued its rotation, unaware that its greatest test was approaching. The Zephyrian fleet dropped out of hyperspace above Earth like a storm of living diamonds. 50 massive ships materialized in perfect formation, each one bristling with weapons that glowed like captured starlight. Their arrival sent shockwaves through every detection system on the planet dotted in ORAD headquarters. General Sarah Mitchell stared at the screens in disbelief. "How many ships did you say?" 50 confirmed, Mom. Each one approximately 15 miles long. They're just sitting there, waiting. Within hours, every major city on Earth received the same message, broadcast in perfect English across all frequencies. "People of this world, you will surrender unconditionally to the Zephyrian Empire. Resistance is futile. You have 24 hours to respond." The United Nations Emergency Assembly convened in record time. President Chen of the UN Security Council stood before the gathered world leaders, his face grim. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're facing the impossible. These ships could level our cities without breaking a sweat. Our weapons can't even scratch their hulls. So what do you suggest?" Asked Prime Minister Okafor, "That we just roll over and play dead? I'm suggesting we be smart about this. We arrange a meeting. We negotiate. Maybe we can find some middle ground." 3 days later, the meeting was set. Location: a neutral zone in Earth's orbit. The human delegation consisted of Ambassador Eleanor Rodriguez, General Mitchell, and Dr. James Park, humanity's leading xenobiologist. They rode up in humanity's most advanced shuttle, which looked like a toy next to the Zephyrian vessels Admiral Vexthor awaited for them aboard his flagship. He had prepared a standard conquest chamber, a massive room designed to intimidate. Lesser species, crystal formations jutted from the walls like frozen lightning. The air itself seemed to hum with barely contained energy. When the human delegation entered, Vexthara was genuinely surprised. These creatures were smaller than he'd expected, soft-looking, with no natural armor whatsoever. They looked fragile enough to break with a gentle touch. "I am Admiral Vexthar of the Zephyrian Empire," he announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You stand before the masters of this galaxy." Ambassador Rodriguez stepped forward, showing no signs of fear despite being surrounded by beings that could crush her without effort. "I'm Eleanor Rodriguez, representing the United Nations of Earth. We're here to discuss terms, Vexthar. Mandibles clicked in amusement. "There are no terms. You surrender completely, or your world burns. This is how it has always been." Dr. Park activated his recording device for the record. "We need to understand what surrender means to your people." "Simple," Vexthar replied. "Your leaders will kneel before Zephyrian authority. Your people will work for the Empire. Your resources belong to us. Your armies will be disbanded. Your weapons destroyed." The humans exchanged glances. "General," Mitchell spoke up, "and if we refuse, then you die. All of you. We glass your planet and take the resources anyway. Ambassador Rodriguez took a deep breath. Admiral, with respect. That's not going to happen. The chamber fell silent. Vexthara tilted his massive crystalline head. I don't understand. Did you not hear what I said? We can destroy your entire civilization. We heard you. Rodriguez replied calmly. And we're saying no. This was unprecedented. Vexthara had conquered 847 worlds. Every single species had surrendered when faced with Zephyrian might. Some begged, some cried, some tried to bargain, but none had ever simply said no. You cannot be serious, Sub-Commander Krynal interjected. Your weapons are primitive. Your ships are toys. You have no chance of victory. General Mitchell stepped forward. Maybe not, but we'll fight anyway. Why, Vexthara demanded, his voice rising. Why would you choose death over service? Service to the Empire is an honor. Dr. Park looked up. From his notes, because some things are worth dying for. Freedom, the right to choose our own path, our families, our homes, our future. That makes no sense. Vexthara's crystal armor began glowing brighter, a sign of agitation among his species. Fear should guide your actions. The strong survive by submitting to the strong. That's where you're wrong, Ambassador Rodriguez said quietly. Sometimes the strong survive by refusing to submit at all. The Admiral's frustration reached a breaking point. These soft creatures weren't following the natural order. They weren't showing proper fear. In his confusion and anger, he gestured too forcefully, his massive crystalline hand sweeping through the air. The blow caught Ambassador Rodriguez across the chest. Her fragile human body crumpled instantly, blood spreading across the crystal floor. Eleanor, General Mitchell dropped to her knees beside the fallen ambassador, but it was too late. Rodriguez's eyes stared sightlessly at the chamber ceiling. The silence that followed was deafening. Vexthara stared at his hand in shock. He hadn't meant to kill her. Among Zephyrians, such a gesture would barely register as a tap. But these humans were so fragile. Dr. Park's voice cut through the silence. Cold as space itself, you just made the biggest mistake in your empire's history. It was an accident. Vexthara protested. I did not intend. Doesn't matter, General Mitchell said, rising to her feet. Her eyes blazed with fury. You want to know about human nature, Admiral? Here's lesson 1. We don't forgive, and we don't forget. Within hours, the news had spread across Earth. Ambassador Eleanor Rodriguez, mother of 2, former teacher, and humanity's voice for peace, was dead. Killed during diplomatic talks by an alien who didn't understand his own strength. The UN Security Council's vote was unanimous. President Chen's declaration was broadcast to every human on Earth and into space where the Zephyrian fleet waited. The United Nations of Earth hereby declares a state of war against the Zephyrian Empire. We will not surrender. We will not negotiate. We will fight with everything we have until either they leave our system or there are no humans left to resist them. Admiral Vexthara received the message on his bridge, still trying to process what had gone wrong in all his centuries of conquest. Nothing like this had ever happened, Admiral. Sub-Commander Krynal said hesitantly. They're actually going to fight us. A primitive species is declaring war on the Empire. Vexthara looked out at the small blue world below, where millions of soft, fragile creatures were preparing to face his overwhelming force. For the first time in his life, he felt something he couldn't quite identify. Later, he would recognize it as the first stirring of doubt. The first battle should have been over in minutes. Admiral Vexthara had deployed 3 of his smaller assault ships to Earth's major cities, expecting quick surrender once the humans saw their firepower in action. Instead, He watched in growing confusion as his tactical displays lit up with impossible readings. Report. He barked at his communications. Officer, sir, Assault Group Alpha is. They're requesting backup. Backup against primitive humans. The officer's crystalline features flickered with uncertainty. They say the humans are fighting back, effectively. Vexthara pulled up the battle feed from New York City. What he saw defied everything he knew about warfare. The humans weren't forming traditional battle lines or trying to match Zephyrian firepower. Instead, they were everywhere and nowhere, striking from shadows, rooftops, and underground tunnels. A squad of Zephyrian warriors, each one 8 feet of nearly indestructible crystal armor, advanced through Times Square. Their energy weapons cut through abandoned vehicles like paper. But as they moved, explosions erupted from the buildings round them, not powerful enough to kill, but enough to disorient and separate the squad. Where are the attacks coming from? Demanded Captain Zixkar, leading the ground assault. His answer came in the form of a human soldier dropping from a fire escape 20 stories up, a crude explosive device strapped to his chest. The blast barely scratched the Zephyrian's armor, but the shock of it, the willingness to die just 2 cosminer damage, left the alien warrior stunned. From the shadows of a demolished store, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos watched through her rifle scope. She'd been a sniper in Afghanistan before the aliens came. Now she was humanity's hope. One shot at a time. Target the joints, she whispered into her radio to the other resistance fighters. Between the crystal plates. That's where they're vulnerable. Her first shot took out a Zephyrian's mid-joint. Not fatal, but enough to drop the 8-foot giant. Her second shot hit another in the elbow, making his energy weapon go wild, accidentally striking one of his own teammates. Captain Zixkar had never experienced anything like this. In 847 previous conquests, enemy forces either surrendered immediately or made futile direct attacks that were easily crushed. But these humans were different. They hit and ran, used their own destroyed city as cover, and seemed to get more aggressive with every casualty they took. Command, we need extraction, Zixkar reported. The humans are using guerrilla tactics. They're turning their losses into weapons against us, above the earth. Admiral Vexthara watched similar scenes playing out across the globe. In London, humans had flooded the underground tunnels and were using the subway system to launch surprise attacks before disappearing. In Tokyo, civilians were rigging buildings to collapse on Zephyrian patrols. In Moscow, human engineers had somehow managed to hack into their own nuclear power plants, threatening to create radioactive zones that would deny the aliens access to entire regions. Sir. Sub-Commander Crionel approached hesitantly. We're receiving reports from all ground teams. The humans are. They're not fighting like any species we've encountered. What do you mean? They're using their dead as inspiration rather than allowing death to demoralize them. When we kill their leaders, new ones immediately take their place. When we destroy their equipment, they build more from scrap. When we corner them, she paused, struggling with the concept. They choose to die rather than surrender, and somehow this makes the remaining humans fight harder. Vexthara studied the tactical reports flowing in. Human casualties were enormous by any reasonable standard. They were losing 100 fighters for every Zephyrian. But instead of breaking their spirit, each loss seemed to fuel their resistance. In the ruins of what used to be Chicago, Colonel Jake Morrison led what remained of the 3rd Infantry Division in a desperate holding. Action. They'd lost 80% of their men in the first week, but somehow they were still fighting. Listen up. Morrison shouted to his remaining troops as Zephyrian dropships approached their position. They think we're going to break. They think losing our friends means we're getting weaker. He held up a photo. Ambassador Rodriguez, the woman whose death had started this war. But they don't understand humans. Every person we lose makes us stronger. Every friend they kill gives us more reason to fight. The humans cheered, a sound that carried across the battlefield. To the approaching Zephyrians, it was a terrifying noise, the sound of a species that had embraced the possibility of extinction rather than accept defeat. Private Chen, barely 18 years old, looked at the massive alien war machines approaching and felt his hands shake, not from fear, from excitement for Eleanor. He shouted, repeating the battle cry that had spread across Earth's resistance forces. The Zephyrian ground commander, Major Veltar, heard the human battle cry and felt something he'd never experienced before. His crystal armor seemed suddenly less protective. His energy weapon felt inadequate for the first time in his centuries-long life. He was afraid. These creatures are insane, he reported to his superiors. They fight like cornered animals, but they coordinate like a hive mind. They learn from every engagement. They adapt faster than we can adjust our tactics. Back on the flagship, Admiral Vexthar reviewed casualty reports with growing unease. Zephyrian losses were still relatively light, but they were losses for the first time in Imperial history. An enemy was actually killing his soldiers. More disturbing were the psychological reports. Zephyrian warriors were requesting reassignment. Some were developing what human doctors would call PTSD. The crystalline soldiers who had conquered nearly 1,000 worlds were beginning to fear a species that shouldn't even be able to scratch thy armor. Admiral, his tactical officer reported. The humans have begun broadcasting something they call propaganda on all frequencies. They're sharing stories of our casualties, celebrating every small victory. It's having an effect on our troops. Vexthar listened to a human broadcast today. Resistance Cell 7 took down another crystal giant in Detroit. Maria Santos, the sniper they can't catch, claimed her 15th kill. Remember, for every human they murder, we make them pay. We are not their prey. We are their nightmare. For the first time in 3,000 years of conquest, the Zephyrian Empire was learning what it meant to be afraid, and the humans were just getting started, 6 months into the war. Admiral Vexthar stood before the Zephyrian High Command via holographic transmission. The crystal beings gathered round their obsidian council table represented 3 millennia of unbroken conquest. Today, for the first time in Imperial history, they were questioning their own military doctrine. Explain to us again, demanded High Counselor Kethmora, how ancient crystalline form pulsing with irritation, how a primitive species has managed to hold off the 847th Conquest Fleet for half a standard cycle. Vexthar S. armor dimmed with embarrassment. Honored Council, these humans do not follow any logical pattern of warfare. When we increase pressure, they don't break. They become more dangerous. Impossible, scoffed War Minister Drac Volume. All species submit when faced with overwhelming force. It is the natural order. Permission to show the council recordings from the Mars colony assault. Vexthar requested. The holographic display shifted to show the red planet, where humanity had established their first off-world settlement just 50 years earlier. The colony consisted of 3 pressurized domes connected by underground tunnels, a pathetic settlement by Zephyrian standards. Initial scans showed 50,000 humans. Vexthar narrated. Standard protocol suggested they would surrender immediately. When faced with our Titan-class assault ship, the recording showed the massive Zephyrian vessel, 5 miles long and bristling with planet-cracking weapons, positioning itself above the tiny human colony. The surrender demand was broadcast in multiple languages. Inhabitants of Mars colony. Alpha, you have 1 hour to surrender unconditionally. The human response came exactly 1 hour later. Not words, But action, every dome simultaneously vented its atmosphere in controlled bursts, creating massive dust storms that obscured the colony from orbital view in the chaos. The humans launched every piece of equipment they had, mining, ships, construction vehicles, even personal transports, directly at the Zephyrian vessel. Suicidal, muttered High Counselor Kethmora, but ineffective. Watch, Vexthara said grimly. The improvised human fleet was indeed destroyed within minutes. But the debris field they created was enormous. Hidden within that debris were dozens of nuclear devices, mining charges repurposed as weapons. When they detonated simultaneously against the Titan-class ship's hull, the mighty vessel's shields flickered. Clever, admitted War Minister Drac Volume, but ultimately futile. The attack was a diversion. Vexthara continued, while we focused on the debris field. The colonists used their mining equipment to dig deeper into Mars' crust. By the time we realized what they were doing, they had reached the planet's geothermal core. The hologram showed seismic readings spiking across Mars. The humans had essentially turned the entire planet into a weapon, threatening to trigger massive volcanic eruptions that would destroy the colony and any Zephyrian forces on the surface. Governor Lisa Chang's final transmission to the Zephyrian fleet was burned into every alien warrior's memory. You want Mars? Come take it. But understand this. We'd rather see our home burn than let you have it. And when you leave here, remember that there are billions more humans just like us. The Mars colony had held for 3 weeks before finally falling. But the cost in Zephyrian resources and morale was staggering. More importantly, word of the human resistance had spread to other species across the galaxy. Show them the intelligence reports. Subcommander Crynal added via transmission from Earth's orbit. New holographic displays appeared, showing data from across Zephyrian space. Species that had been conquered decades ago were beginning to show signs of unrest. The Vorthan rebels had resumed attacks on Imperial supply lines. The Nexian workforce was conducting slowdowns in the crystal mines. Worst of all, some conquered species were attempting to study human resistance tactics. The humans call it inspiration, Crynal reported. They broadcast their battles across subspace frequencies. Every small victory, every act of defiance, spreads to other worlds. They're turning their war against us into a symbol of resistance. High Counselor Kethmora's form flickered with what humans would recognize as anxiety. One primitive species cannot threaten the stability of our entire empire. With respect, honored council. Vexthara said carefully. They already have. The evidence was overwhelming. On Earth, what should have been a quick conquest had turned into a grinding war of attrition. Human cities, reduced to rubble, had become maze-like fortresses where every building was a potential ambush point. The humans had learned to use the Zephyrians' own superior firepower against them, collapsing structures to create barriers and traps. Major Veltares ground reports painted an increasingly grim picture. They've turned their entire planet into a weapon. He reported from the ruins of Berlin. Every sewer tunnel is a potential attack route. Every basement could hide explosives. They've weaponized their own infrastructure. The psychological impact was even worse. Zephyrian soldiers, bred for conquest, were developing symptoms their medical officers had never seen before. Combat stress, the humans called it. Battle fatigue, fear. Captain Zexkares' final report before his evacuation for psychological treatment had shocked the entire command structure. They don't fight to win. They fight to make us pay. Every human we kill costs us resources, time, and warriors. They've turned death itself into a tactical advantage. The breaking point came during the Battle of Australia. The humans had retreated to the continent's interior, turning the vast outback into a killing field. Zephyrian forces, expecting to corner and destroy the remaining resistance. Instead found themselves facing a coordinated campaign unlike anything in Imperial military history. The humans had spent months preparing. Every water source was contaminated with radioactive material that didn't affect humans but interfered with Zephyrian energy systems. The desert itself had been turned into a weapon. Solar collection rays that focused sunlight into devastating beam weapons, underground bunkers connected by thousands of miles of tunnels, and most terrifyingly, booby traps that used the aliens' own crystal technology against them. When the dust settled after 6 weeks of fighting, the Zephyrians had technically won. Australia was under Imperial control. But the cost had been catastrophic. Nearly 30% of their ground forces were casualties. Equipment losses were in the billions of credits, and the psychological damage to their military was incalculable. War Minister Drac Volume studied the casualty reports in silence. Finally, he spoke, the words that no Zephyrian had ever uttered in 3,000 years of conquest. Perhaps we should consider withdrawal. The silence that followed was deafening. High Counselor Kethmora's ancient form pulsed with disbelief. You're suggesting the Empire retreat from a single world. I'm suggesting. Drac Volume replied carefully that some victories cost more than their worth. Admiral Vexthara watched from his flagship as the debate raged among the High Command. Below him, Earth continued to spin. Its surface scarred by months of warfare, but its people still fighting. Somewhere down there, humans were planning their next impossible victory. Their next devastating surprise. For the first time in his career, the Admiral wondered if the Zephyrian Empire had finally met its match. 1 year after the war began, both civilizations stood on the edge of annihilation. Earth was a scarred wasteland. Its great cities reduced to rubble, its skies choked with smoke. But in the depths of Cheyenne Mountain, President Chen sat across from Admiral Vexthar in what would become the most important meeting in galactic history. The human leader looked exhausted. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his hands shook slightly from months of stress. But his voice remained steady as he spoke. Admiral, we need to talk. Vexthara's crystalline armor was cracked in dozens of places. Battle damage that he'd refused to repair as a reminder of what this war had cost. His once proud fleet of 50 ships had been reduced to 12 battered vessels. The inferior humans had destroyed 38 ships of the line. Something no species had ever accomplished. There is nothing to discuss, Vexthara said, but his voice lacked its former conviction. The Empire does not negotiate with primitives. Then why are you here? Chen asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them. Why was he here? Vexthara had been asking himself the same thing. By Imperial law, he should have glassed the planet months ago and accepted the strategic loss. Instead, he'd continued, fighting a war that was bleeding his empire dry. The truth was, the humans had achieved something unprecedented. They'd made the Zephyrians afraid of them. Your species, Vexthara said slowly, is insane. Chen actually smiled at that. Maybe. But we're still here, on the walls around them. Holographic displays showed the current state of both civilizations. Earth's population had fallen from 8 billion to 3 billion. But those 3 billion were still fighting. Every child old enough to hold a weapon had been trained to resist. Every adult was a potential guerrilla fighter. Every city was a fortress. The Zephyrian Empire's displays told a different story. For the first time in 3 millennia, conquered worlds were in open revolt. The Vorthan system had declared independence. The Nexian workers had seized control of the crystal mines. Dozens of species that had knelt before Zephyrian might for generations were now following the human example. Do you know what your people did to us? Vexthar asked, his voice carrying a note of wonder. You taught the galaxy how to say no from the depths of the mountain facility. General Mitchell's voice crackled over the intercom. "Mr. President, we've got movement in the Pacific. The Zephyrians are powering up their planet crackers." Chen didn't flinch. "Admiral, if you're planning to destroy Earth, do it quickly. But understand this. We've seeded the galaxy with our story. Every species knows about the humans who would unbow. Kill us all, and you'll face 1,000 rebellions." Vixthara's mandibles clicked in frustration. It was true. Human resistance broadcasts had spread across subspace frequencies. The story of Eleanor Rodriguez, the ambassador whose death had started this war, was being told on worlds the humans had never even heard of. The tale of Maria Santos, the sniper who'd killed 47 Zephyrian soldiers before dying in a final heroic stand, had become a symbol of resistance across the galaxy. "Your planet is dying," Vexthara pointed out. "Your people are starving. Your cities are ruins. How can you call this victory?" "Because we're still free," Chen replied simply. "And because you know that even if you kill every human on Earth, you'll never feel safe again. Every time you encounter a new species, you'll wonder, will these be like the humans? Will these ones fight back?" The Admiral fell silent. The human was right. The war had shattered something fundamental in Zephyrian thinking. The concept of inevitable victory was broken. Fear, an emotion they'd forgotten existed, now haunted every Imperial soldier. "What do you want?" Vexthar asked finally. Chen leaned forward. "Peace, a real peace, not surrender, not conquest. Peace. The Empire has never made peace with equals. We conquer or we destroy." "Then maybe it's time to learn something new." The negotiation that followed lasted 18 hours. Chen's terms were simple but revolutionary. Complete Zephyrian withdrawal from the Sol system, recognition of humanity as a sovereign species, and most importantly, an agreement that the Empire would offer membership rather than conquest to future species they encountered. "You're asking us to abandon 3,000 years of Imperial doctrine," Vexthara protested. "I'm asking you to survive," Chen replied. "Because if you don't change, the galaxy will tear your empire apart." We showed them it could be done. As if to prove his point, Sub-Commander Krynol's voice interrupted from the flagship. "Admiral, we're receiving reports from 17 sectors. The rebellions are spreading. The Corvani have destroyed our garrison on their home world, the Delton. Mining colonies have gone silent. Sir, the Empire is fracturing." Vexthara closed his eyes. In trying to conquer one stubborn world, they'd lost their grip on dozens of others. The humans had turned their very resistance into a weapon against Imperial authority. "If we agree to these terms," he said slowly, "what guarantees do we have that humans won't spread their poison of rebellion further?" Shen smiled grimly. "None. But you have our word that if you leave us alone, we'll leave you alone. We never wanted to conquer anyone, Admiral. We just wanted to be free." The Admiral looked at the scarred human leader and saw something that challenged everything he believed about strength and power. This man had watched his world burn, his people die, his civilization crumble, and he'd never once considered surrender. "Your species terrifies me," Vexthar admitted quietly. "Good," Chen replied. "Maybe that will help you remember this lesson." The Treaty of Cheyenne Mountain was signed at dawn on a blood-red Earth morning. The Zephyrian Empire agreed to full withdrawal from human space and recognition of human sovereignty. In return, humanity agreed to cease their resistance broadcasts and allow the Empire to retreat with honor. As the Zephyrian fleet prepared to depart, Vexthara stood on his bridge looking down at the battered blue world. His communications officer approached hesitantly. "Admiral, High Command is demanding an explanation for our withdrawal." Vexthara was quiet for a long moment. "Tell them," he said finally, "that we encountered a species that cannot be conquered. not because they're too strong, but because they refuse to be broken. The ships turned away from Earth and jumped to hyperspace, carrying with them the knowledge that the galaxy's apex predators had been humbled by a species that fought not with superior technology, but with unbreakable will. In the ruins of Washington, D.C., President Chen watched the last Zephyrian ship disappear into the stars. General Mitchell joined him on the observation deck. "Think they'll be back?" she asked. Chen shook his head. "No, we taught them something they'll never forget. That some things are worth dying for. And sometimes that's enough to live for." The war was over. Humanity had won not through strength, but through the simple refusal to give up. In the depths of space, other species were learning the same lesson. The age of easy conquest was ending. The humans had shown the galaxy that even the mightiest empire could be challenged by those who had everything to lose and nothing left to fear.